Lila Brooks thought she was invisible, just another waitress struggling to keep her grandmother alive on minimum wage and broken dreams. But when a desperate love letter meant for no one finds its way to the most dangerous man in the city, everything changes. Matteo De Luca doesn't just read her words, he feels them, and for the first time since losing his wife and unborn child to a car bomb, his frozen heart begins to beat again. What starts as an innocent correspondence becomes a deadly game when rival families discover the Mafia boss's weakness has a name, an address, and a grandmother who needs protecting. Now Lila must choose between the safety of invisibility and a love that could either save them both or destroy everything she's fought to protect. The letters that brought them together might be the very thing that tears them apart forever, because in Matteo's world, love isn't just dangerous, it's a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this love story is about to prove that sometimes the wrong address leads to exactly the right person. The eviction notice felt heavy in Lila's hands, heavier than it should have been for just a piece of paper. She stared at the red letters stamped across the top, her heart sinking with each word. 30 days, that's all they had. The October wind bit through her thin coat as she peeled the notice from their apartment door. Her fingers were stiff from the cold and from working a double shift at Tony's diner. Everything ached. Her feet, her back, her soul, but mostly her heart. Inside the small apartment, Grandmother Evelyn slept in her chair by the window. The old woman's breathing was shallow, each exhale a soft whistle through her tired lungs. Lila folded the notice carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Evelyn didn't need this worry on top of everything else. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person. Lila filled the dented kettle with tap water and set it on the stove. The gas flame sputtered, blue and weak. She'd been stretching the grocery money for 3 weeks now. Tea bags got used twice. Bread crusts became tomorrow's breakfast. While the water heated, she pulled out a pen and paper from the drawer that stuck every time. Her hands shook a little, not from the cold anymore, but from something deeper, something that had been building inside her chest for months. The letter started as nothing, just words on paper, but as she wrote, something broke open inside her. All the tenderness she never said out loud, all the love she kept locked away because there was no one to give it to. She wrote about wanting someone to come home to, someone who would ask about her day and really listen, someone who would hold her when the world felt too heavy. She wrote about dreams she'd given up, about the little house with yellow curtains she'd seen in magazines, about Sunday mornings that smelled like coffee and felt like peace, about a love that was gentle and strong at the same time. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Page after page of wishes and hopes, and the kind of love she thought only existed in movies. When she finally stopped writing, her hand was cramped and her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The kettle whistled. Lila wiped her face and made tea with yesterday's tea bag. She sat at the small table and read what she'd written. It was beautiful and sad and completely honest. It was also completely private. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. Her old address was still muscle memory, and she wrote it without thinking. The apartment they'd had to leave 6 months ago when the rent went up. The place where she'd been happy, where Evelyn had her own garden on the fire escape. "I'll never send this," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "It's just for me." But she kept the envelope in her apron pocket anyway, right next to the eviction notice. 2 pieces of paper that said everything about her life right now. Morning came too early, like it always did. The rain drummed against the windows and Lila could hear Evelyn's cough starting up in the next room. She dressed quickly in the half-light, pulling on her diner uniform and the same thin coat that never kept her warm enough. "I'm leaving, Grandma," she called softly through the bedroom door. "Be careful, baby girl," came the raspy reply, "and don't work too hard." Lila smiled despite everything. Evelyn always said that. Don't work too hard. As if she had a choice. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the streets into rivers of grey water. Lila ran for the bus stop, her sneakers splashing through puddles that soaked through to her socks. She was going to be late. Again. At the corner mailbox, she stopped. The letter was still in her pocket, creased from being folded and unfolded so many times. She'd read it again this morning while Evelyn slept. It still made her heart ache in the best and worst way. Maybe because the morning felt so hopeless, or maybe because the rain made everything seem unreal. Lila pulled out the envelope. The mailbox slot was dark and waiting. Before she could think too hard about it, she dropped the letter in. It wasn't until she was on the bus that she realized her mistake. The address. She'd written her old apartment number, 4B instead of 4A. The letter was going to strangers. Her stomach dropped. What had she done? That letter was full of her most private thoughts, her deepest wishes. And now some random person was going to read it and probably laugh, but it was too late. The letter was gone, carried away by the postal service to wherever letters go when they're sent to the wrong place. Across town, in a building made of glass and steel that touched the clouds, a man named Matteo De Luca sorted through his mail with practiced indifference. Bills, business correspondence, invitations to events he wouldn't attend, and then an envelope that didn't belong. The handwriting was careful and feminine. His name wasn't on it, just an address that was almost his, but not quite. The apartment 1 floor below. He should have given it to the doorman to sort out, should have marked it, "Return to sender." Instead, he opened it. The first line stopped him cold. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I need to tell someone about the kind of love I dream about. Matteo's hand stilled on the paper. He sat down heavily in his leather chair, the one that faced the windows overlooking the harbor. 3 years. It had been 3 years since anyone had written to him about love, since anyone had written to him about anything that mattered. He read every word, slowly, carefully. This woman, and he could tell it was a woman by the way she wrote about wanting to be held, about Sunday mornings and yellow curtains, had poured her heart onto these pages. She wrote about working 2 jobs and taking care of someone she loved, about being tired but still believing in something beautiful. She wrote about the kind of man she dreamed of, someone gentle but strong, someone who would protect what he loved, someone who had been hurt before but still had room in his heart for more. Matteo set the letter down and stared out at the harbor. Rain streaked the windows like tears. In the reflection, he could see himself, 34 years old, successful by any measure, and emptier than the space between stars. 3 years ago, he'd buried his wife, Sophia, and their unborn daughter. 3 years ago, a car bomb meant for him had taken away everything that mattered. Since then, he'd lived in a world made of business and duty, and the kind of loneliness that ate you from the inside out. But this letter, this accidental letter from a woman who signed herself only L, it reminded him that love still existed somewhere, that people still believed in Sunday mornings and yellow curtains, and the possibility of being happy. His pen felt foreign in his hand. It had been months since he'd written anything that wasn't about business. But the words came anyway, careful and measured. "Dear L," he began, "your letter found its way to someone who needed to remember that gentleness still exists in this world." He wrote about safety, about how her words deserved a place where they wouldn't be laughed at or dismissed. He didn't tell her who he was or what he did. He just thanked her for reminding him that hope was still possible. When he was finished, he addressed the envelope carefully. Not to the wrong apartment this time, but to the return address she'd written in the corner. He sealed it with wax, an old habit from another life. Then he gave it to his driver with instructions to hand-deliver it immediately. The lunch rush at Tony's diner was brutal, every table full, orders backing up in the kitchen, and Lila running between them all with a smile she didn't feel. Her feet were killing her, and she'd spilled coffee on her uniform twice already. "Order up," Tony called from the kitchen. Lila grabbed the plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, balancing them along her arm like she'd done 1,000 times before. Table 6. The businessman who always ordered the same thing and never looked up from his phone. But today was different. Today, when she set his plate down, he smiled. "Thank you," he said simply. It was such a small thing, but it made her day a little brighter. Most people looked right through her, like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. The postman came in around 3 when the diner was finally starting to empty out. He always stopped for coffee and a slice of pie. Today he had mail for Tony and something else. "This one's for you, honey," he said, handing Lila an envelope. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she didn't recognize. Clean, masculine letters that looked like they'd been formed by someone who was used to being careful with words. Lila's heart started racing. Could this be? No, that was impossible. Her letter had gone to the wrong address. Whoever got it would have just thrown it away. Right? She waited until her break to open it, sat in the alley behind the diner, where the dumpster smelled like old grease and the brick wall was covered in graffiti that someone had tried to paint over. The letter inside was short, just a few paragraphs, but every word hit her like a small miracle. He'd read her letter, really read it, and instead of laughing, he'd written back with kindness. He said her words deserved safety, that they'd reminded him of something he'd forgotten. There was something in the way he wrote about protection that made her chest tight, like he understood what it meant to be careful with fragile things, like he knew what it was like to be hurt. At the bottom, he'd signed it simply M. Lila read the letter 3 times before her break was over. Each time she felt a little less alone in the world. Someone had heard her, really heard her, and instead of judging, they'd responded with gentleness. That night, after Evelyn had taken her medicine and gone to bed, Lila sat at the kitchen table with a fresh piece of paper. She thought carefully about what to write back. She wanted to be honest, but not too open. Grateful, but not desperate. She told him about working at the diner, about the way some people looked through her like she wasn't there, and how his kindness had made her feel seen. She asked careful questions. What made him believe in safety? What had he forgotten that her words had helped him remember? She didn't ask who he was or where he lived. Some part of her knew that mystery was important right now, like stepping too hard might break whatever this was. She signed it L again and wrote his address carefully on the envelope. Not her old address this time, but whatever address he'd used to write back to her. Walking to the mailbox felt like crossing a bridge she couldn't see the other side of. 3 days passed before Mateo's reply came. 3 days of Lila checking the mail twice and jumping every time the postman walked by the diner. When it finally arrived, she could barely wait until her break to read it. He wrote about forgetting how to see small kindnesses, about how work had made him hard in places where he used to be soft. He asked about her grandmother. Somehow he'd picked up from her first letter that she was caring for someone. He wanted to know if she was managing okay, if there was anything she needed. The offer of help should have scared her. It should have set off every warning bell in her head. Instead, it made her feel warmer than she had in months. Over the next week, letters moved between them like a careful dance. He told her about recipes his grandmother had made, and she shared stories about Evelyn's garden that used to grow on the fire escape. He wrote about music that reminded him of better times, and she described the way rain sounded different depending on where you heard it. They never talked about work, never asked the questions that might break the spell. It was like they'd both agreed that this place they'd found together was separate from the rest of the world, safer, more real in its unrealness. But even in their careful correspondence, Lila started to notice things, little details that didn't quite fit, like the way he wrote about safety, as if he knew it from both sides, like someone who had been protected and someone who did the protecting. Or how he mentioned traveling for work, but never said what kind of work. How he knew expensive restaurants, but also hole-in-the-wall places that served the best food in the city. And then there was the stationery, heavy paper that felt expensive under her fingers, handwriting that was too controlled, too careful, like someone who was used to being watched. But Lila pushed those thoughts away. Whatever M did for work, whoever he was in the real world, he was kind to her. That's what mattered. Until the night she saw the black SUV. It was parked across the street from the diner when she locked up after the late shift. Windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. Engine running even though no one got in or out. At first she thought it was just coincidence. Rich people had cars like that all the time. But when she walked to the bus stop, the SUV followed. Slowly, keeping its distance but definitely following. Lila's hands shook as she dug through her purse for her phone. Who could she call? The police? And tell them what? That she felt watched. The bus came and the SUV stayed behind, but the next morning it was back, parked in a different spot, but definitely there. And the morning after that, someone was watching her, someone who knew where she worked. And the only new thing in her life was the letters. The alley behind Tony's diner smelled like old cooking oil and wet concrete. Lila stood with her back against the brick wall, arms crossed tight over her chest. She'd asked M to meet her here through their latest letter exchange, asked him to explain why someone was watching her. She didn't have to wait long. The man who walked around the corner was not what she'd expected. Tall and lean, wearing an expensive suit that somehow looked comfortable on him. Dark hair graying a little at the temples. Eyes that took in everything. The fire escape above them. The doors that might be exits, where she stood in relation to the street. But it was his hands that made her chest tight with fear. Careful hands that had never done hard labor. And on his neck, just visible above his collar, the edge of a tattoo that looked like it meant something dangerous. "You're M," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mateo," he replied. His voice was exactly what she'd imagined from his letters, quiet but sure of itself. "And you're L." "Lila." She stayed pressed against the wall. "Are you the reason someone's been watching me?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Someone's been watching you." Black SUV for the past week, every day when I leave work. Mateo went very still. the kind of still that made the air feel heavy. Describe the car. I don't know cars. It's big and black and expensive looking. Tinted windows. Lila's voice was stronger than she felt. I want to know if you sent them. No. The word was flat and final. I didn't send anyone, but you know who might have. It wasn't a question this time either. Lila was learning to read the spaces between his words. The things he didn't say told her as much as the things he did. Matteo stepped closer, but not too close. Like he knew exactly how much space she needed to feel safe. My work makes me enemies sometimes. If they've connected you to me, what kind of work? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. He was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, traffic hummed and someone's radio played music she couldn't quite make out. When he finally answered, his voice was careful in a way that told her everything. The kind that requires protection. Lila's stomach dropped. She'd known, hadn't she? All those little details that didn't add up. The expensive paper, the controlled handwriting, the way he wrote about safety like someone who lived in a world where safety was never guaranteed. She couldn't say the word, couldn't make it real. I'm someone who has people who don't like him. Matteo's expression didn't change. And if they think hurting you would hurt me, they might try. The brick wall was rough against her back. Lila pressed harder against it, like she could disappear into the stone. This was a mistake, all of it. Maybe. He didn't try to argue with her. But it's too late to unmake it now. I can stop writing. Forget your address. Pretend none of this ever happened. You could try. Matteo reached into his jacket, slowly letting her see what he was doing, and pulled out an envelope. Her latest letter, the one where she'd asked him to meet her. But they've already seen these going back and forth. Already know you matter to me. Matter to him. The words hit harder than they should have. 3 weeks of letters, and somehow she'd become important to this man who lived in a world she didn't understand. So what happens now? She asked. Now, I make sure you're safe. He set the letter on the dumpster between them, not trying to hand it to her directly. I keep watch until whoever's watching you gets bored and moves on. I don't want your protection. I know. There was something almost like a smile in his eyes. You made that clear in your 3rd letter. You want to take care of yourself. Then why? Because wanting something and getting it aren't always the same thing. Matteo stepped back, giving her more space. And because the alternative is watching someone hurt you to get to me, that's not acceptable. Lila stared at him, at this man who'd written her beautiful letters about Sunday mornings and forgotten kindness. Who was standing in an alley offering protection she didn't want from dangers she didn't understand. I don't know you, she said finally. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle now, the same tone from his letters. You know the parts of me that matter. The rest is just complications. Dangerous complications. Yes, at least he was honest. Lila had to give him that. If I say no, if I tell you to leave me alone, then I leave you alone. Matteo pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. A message thread with someone called Nico. But the watch stays. Far enough away that you won't see them. Close enough that if something happens... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lila closed her eyes and tried to think, tried to separate the man from the letters, from the danger, from the kindness, from the fear. It was all tangled up together now, impossible to pick apart. When she opened her eyes, he was still there, still waiting. 1 week, she said. After that we'll see. Matteo nodded once. 1 week. He turned to go, then stopped. Lila? Yeah? For what it's worth, I never meant for this to touch you. The watching, the danger, none of it. I know, she said. And somehow she did. After he left, Lila stayed in the alley for a long time, thinking about letters and protection and the way he'd said her name like it was something precious. She was in trouble. The kind that came from caring about someone you probably shouldn't. But as she finally walked to the bus stop, she noticed something. The black SUV was gone, and for the first time in a week, she didn't feel like she was being watched. Maybe Matteo's protection was different than she'd thought. Maybe it wasn't about controlling her. Maybe it was about keeping her free. The letter came the next morning, delivered with the regular mail like all the others had been. But this one felt different in Lila's hands, heavier somehow. She waited until Evelyn was napping to open it, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold while she stared at the envelope. Inside was just 1 page, fewer words than usual, but each one felt carefully chosen. Lila, I know yesterday changed things between us. I know you're probably scared, and you have every right to be. I want you to know that your safety matters more to me than anything else. More than our letters, more than whatever this is growing between us. You asked what kind of work I do. I run a family business that sometimes requires difficult decisions. I've made enemies. Some of them would hurt innocent people to hurt me. That's the world I live in, and it's not a world I would ever choose for you. But you should know I would never let anyone hurt you. Whatever it costs me, whatever I have to do, that won't happen. If you want to stop writing, I'll understand. If you want me to stay away, I will. But I can't stop the watch, not until I know you're safe. The man driving the black car works for me. His name is Nico, and he's been told to keep his distance. You won't see him unless you need to. I hope you don't need to. Lila read the letter twice before folding it carefully and putting it with the others in the box under her bed. A dozen letters now, each one a small piece of a puzzle she was still trying to understand. She should have been angry, should have felt manipulated or scared or any number of reasonable emotions. Instead, she felt protected, like someone was finally standing between her and all the things that could go wrong. It had been a long time since anyone had cared enough to worry about her safety. Too long. That evening, she wrote back, "Matteo, I'm not sure how I feel about any of this yet. About you, about the watching, about how complicated this has gotten. But I want you to know something too. I'm not as fragile as you might think. I've been taking care of myself and Grandma Evelyn for a long time. I work in a diner where drunk customers sometimes get handsy and angry ones sometimes don't want to pay. I know how to handle trouble. What I don't know is how to handle whatever this is. These letters started as an accident, but they've become something important to me. You've become important to me. That scares me more than any black car. You said I know the parts of you that matter. I think that's true. But I need you to know all the parts of me too. I'm not someone who needs rescuing. If this is going to work, whatever this is, it has to be between equals. 1 week, remember? Let's see what happens." She mailed it the next morning on her way to work. Spent the day distracted, mixing up orders and dropping things. Tony asked if she was feeling okay. She said she was just tired, but tired wasn't the right word. Afraid was closer, not of Matteo or his world or even the danger that came with it. Afraid of how much she wanted to trust him, how much she was already starting to care. That evening, walking home from her late shift, she saw him. Not Matteo, the other one, Nico. He was sitting in a different car this time, something smaller and less obvious. But when she glanced over her shoulder, she caught a glimpse of his face in the streetlight, calm, alert, watching. Instead of being frightened, Lila felt oddly comforted. Someone was looking out for her, someone she was starting to trust. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't wave or nod or give any sign that she'd seen him. But as she climbed the steps to her building, she felt safer than she had in weeks. Maybe protection didn't have to mean giving up independence. Maybe it could mean something else entirely. Maybe it could mean partnership. The thought followed her to sleep that night, tangled up with dreams of letters and gentle voices, and the possibility that someone dangerous could also be kind. In the morning, there would be more questions to answer, more choices to make about how much risk she was willing to accept for the chance at something real. But tonight, for the first time since this all started, Lila felt like she might not be facing those choices alone, and that made all the difference. The flyer was greasy and cheap, the kind of paper that left smudges on your fingers, but the words printed on it made Lila's blood run cold. "How's your pen pal doing? Hope he writes back soon." It had been slipped under her apartment door sometime during her shift at the diner. Lila stood in the narrow hallway, holding the paper like it might bite her. Someone knew about the letters. Someone was watching close enough to know about the mail coming and going. Her hands shook as she unlocked the front door. The building felt different now, unsafe, like the walls couldn't protect them anymore. "Grandma?" she called softly. "In here, baby girl." Evelyn's voice came from the living room, but it sounded strained. Lila found her grandmother sitting in her chair by the window, breathing shallow and quick. The climb up 3 flights of stairs was getting harder every day. Evelyn tried to hide it, but Lila could see how the effort wore her down. "How are you feeling?" Lila knelt beside the chair, pressing her hand to Evelyn's forehead. No fever, but her skin felt papery and thin. "I'm fine. Don't you worry about me." But Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Long day at work?" Something like that. Lila folded the flyer and shoved it deep into her pocket. Evelyn didn't need to know about this, not when her breathing was already labored. That night, after Evelyn had taken her medicine and gone to bed, Lila sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone number Matteo had given her, the one that would connect her to Nico. She'd promised herself she'd never use it, but the flyer felt like a threat, burning a hole in her pocket. She dialed before she could change her mind. "Yeah?" The voice was rough, careful. "This is Lila. Something happened." A pause. Then, "Where are you?" "Home. But someone left a message." "They know about the letters." "Don't go anywhere. Don't answer the door. We'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Lila stared at her phone, heart pounding. What had she just set in motion? 15 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Pack a bag for your grandmother. Tonight." "I don't understand why we have to leave." Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, watching Lila throw clothes into an old suitcase. "This is our home." "I know, Grandma, but it's not safe right now." Lila tried to keep her voice calm, but inside she was screaming. How did you explain to a 78-year-old woman that her granddaughter had accidentally gotten involved with dangerous people? Safe from what? Lila paused with Evelyn's medications in her hands. Half a dozen prescription bottles that kept her grandmother's heart beating steady and her lungs clear. "Some people are angry with a friend of mine. They might try to use us to hurt him." "This friend, he's the one who's been writing to you." It wasn't a question. Evelyn had always been sharp, even when her body was failing her. "Yes, and he's worth this trouble?" Lila looked at her grandmother. Really looked. Evelyn's hair was silver white and thin, her hands spotted with age, her breathing careful and measured. She'd raised Lila after her parents died, worked 2 jobs to keep them fed and housed, never complained, never gave up. "I don't know yet," Lila said honestly. "But he's trying to keep us safe." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we'd better pack." A car arrived exactly when Matteo had said it would. Not the black SUV this time, but something smaller and less obvious. The driver was a woman Lila didn't recognize, middle-aged with kind eyes and gentle hands that helped Evelyn down the apartment stairs. "I'm Rosa," she said as she settled Evelyn into the back seat. "I take care of Mr. DeLuca's house. You'll be very comfortable." The ride through the city was quiet. Lila watched familiar neighborhoods slide past the windows, each block taking them further from everything she knew. Evelyn dozed against her shoulder, exhausted from the stairs and the packing and the upheaval. "How long?" Lila asked Rosa quietly. "As long as it takes." Rosa met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "He's a good man, you know. Different than people think." "How different?" "You'll see." Matteo's house wasn't what Lila had expected. She'd pictured something cold and modern, all glass and steel like his apartment building. Instead, it was a brownstone tucked into a quiet street lined with old trees. Warm light spilled from tall windows, and the front door was painted deep blue. It looked like a home. Rosa helped them up the front steps while Lila carried their bags. The door opened before they reached it, and there was Matteo. Dressed down in dark jeans and a simple sweater, he looked younger, less intimidating. "Lila." He stepped aside to let them pass. "Mrs. Brooks, welcome." "Just Evelyn, please." Lila's grandmother studied him with sharp eyes. "You're the letter writer." "I am." Matteo's smile was gentle, the kind reserved for grandmothers and children. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." The inside of the house was nothing like Lila had imagined either. Soft furniture and warm colors, books on every surface, photographs of people who looked happy. It felt lived in, despite being pristine. "There's soup on the stove," Rosa said, taking their coats. "And I've prepared rooms upstairs. The blue room has a good view of the garden, Evelyn. I thought you might like that." "That's very kind." Evelyn was still studying Matteo, taking his measure in the way only grandmothers could. "You have a lovely home." "Thank you." "Rosa makes it that way." Matteo's gaze found Lila's. "How are you holding up?" "Fine." It was a lie, and they both knew it. She was scared and overwhelmed and completely out of her depth, but saying that out loud would make it too real. "The guest rooms are on the 2nd floor," he continued. "Rosa will show you around, help you get settled. If you need anything—" "We won't be any trouble," Lila interrupted. "We'll stay out of your way." Something flickered in Matteo's expression. "You're not trouble, Lila. You're guests. There's a difference." After Rosa had shown them upstairs, and Evelyn had been settled in a room that was bigger than their entire apartment, Lila found herself alone with Matteo in the kitchen. He was ladling soup into bowls, movements careful and practiced. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "Rosa does most of it, but I can manage the basics." He handed her a bowl. The soup smelled like herbs and comfort. Chicken and vegetables. Nothing fancy. They sat at a kitchen table that could have seated 8, but felt intimate with just the 2 of them. The soup was perfect, warming and nourishing, and exactly what she needed after the stress of packing and leaving. "How long can we stay?" Lila asked between spoonfuls. "As long as you need to." "That's not an answer." Matteo was quiet for a moment, considering his words. The men who left that flyer work for someone who wants to pressure me. Using you would be efficient for them. Until I can convince them otherwise, you're safer here. Convince them how? You don't want to know the details. Lila set down her spoon. Don't do that. Don't decide what I can and can't handle. Fair enough. Matteo met her gaze steadily. I'll make it clear that touching you or your grandmother would be a mistake. The kind of mistake that has permanent consequences. The words should have scared her. Maybe they did, a little. But there was something else there, too. Relief, maybe. Someone was finally standing up for her, taking her safety seriously. And if they don't listen, they will. The certainty in his voice made her believe him. After dinner, Rosa showed Lila to her room. It was across the hall from Evelyn's, decorated in soft greens and creams. The bed was bigger than any she'd ever slept in, piled high with pillows and a quilt that looked handmade. There are fresh towels in the bathroom, Rosa said, opening a door to reveal a space larger than Lila's entire bedroom at home. And extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. This is too much, Lila said quietly. We don't need all this. Mr. DeLuca wants you comfortable. Rosa's voice was firm but kind. He doesn't do things halfway. Rosa? Lila caught the older woman's arm as she turned to go. Is he really as dangerous as people say? Rosa was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. He's dangerous to people who threaten what he protects, but he protects well, and he protects completely. She patted Lila's hand. You're safe here, dear, both of you. Morning came too early and too soft. Instead of traffic and sirens, Lila woke to birdsong and the distant sound of Rosa moving around downstairs. Sunlight streamed through windows that weren't barred or grimy, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. The flyer, the packing, Matteo's house. She dressed quickly and checked on Evelyn, who was still sleeping peacefully in the blue room. Her breathing looked easier here, less labored. Maybe it was the better air, or the lack of stairs, or just the simple fact that she felt safe. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. Rosa was at the stove and Matteo sat at the table with a newspaper and a cup of coffee. Good morning, he said, looking up as she entered. Sleep well? Better than expected. Lila accepted the cup of coffee Rosa pressed into her hands. It was perfect. Strong but not bitter, exactly how she liked it. How did you know? Know what? How I take my coffee. Matteo smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. You mentioned it in your fourth letter. Said your perfect morning would start with coffee that didn't taste like it had been sitting on a hot plate for 6 hours. He'd remembered. A throwaway comment in a letter, and he'd remembered. I need to work today, Lila said, settling into the chair across from him. My shift at the diner starts at 11. Rosa can drive you. I can take the bus. Lila. Matteo's voice was patient but firm. Someone left a threatening note under your door yesterday. You're not taking the bus. I can't live in a cage. It's not a cage, it's protection. What's the difference? Matteo was quiet for a moment, considering. A cage keeps you in. Protection keeps danger out. It was a good answer. Maybe too good. How do I know you won't decide the protection requires more restrictions? That I can't work, can't leave, can't make my own choices? Because I'm giving you my word that won't happen. Matteo set down his coffee cup. But I need something from you, too. What? If something feels wrong, anything at all, you call Nico immediately. Don't hesitate, don't second-guess yourself, just call. Lila thought about it. It seemed reasonable. Fair, even. Okay, she said. But I choose when and where and how much help I need. Agreed. Rosa set a plate of fresh muffins on the table, blueberry and still warm from the oven. You'll like the diner, she told Matteo. Tony makes good coffee. You know the diner? Lila asked, surprised. I may have stopped by yesterday, just to see where you work. Matteo's smile was almost sheepish. I like to know the places that are important to the people I care about. People I care about. The words hit harder than they should have. And what did you think? I think you work very hard for people who don't always appreciate it. His expression grew serious. And I think you deserve better. Better than what? Better than everything. Better hours, better pay, better treatment. Better than having to choose between groceries and your grandmother's medicine. Lila went very still. How do you know about that? Matteo looked uncomfortable for the first time since she'd met him. I pay attention. That's not an answer. I had someone look into your situation, just to make sure you were safe. You investigated me. Lila's voice was sharp now, all the warmth draining out of the morning. I needed to know if anyone was using you to get to me. If there were vulnerabilities that needed protecting, so you invaded my privacy. Yes. No excuses, no justifications, just the truth. Lila stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. She left the kitchen before he could respond, walked through the house until she found a door that led to the back garden. The morning was crisp and clear, and the garden was beautiful. Carefully tended beds of flowers and herbs, a small fountain that bubbled quietly in the corner. But she barely saw any of it. Her mind was spinning with anger and hurt, and the complicated feeling of being cared for by someone who might not trust her enough to ask before helping. She heard footsteps behind her, but didn't turn around. I should have told you, Matteo said quietly. Yes, you should have. I don't apologize for wanting to protect you, but I apologize for going about it the wrong way. Lila finally turned to face him. He'd followed her outside without a coat, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked younger out here, more vulnerable. What did you find out? That you've been working 2 jobs since you were 19, that you gave up a scholarship to community college to take care of your grandmother, that you've never missed a rent payment or a doctor's appointment or a single day of work, even when you were sick yourself. His voice was soft, almost admiring. That you're one of the strongest people I've ever encountered. The anger started to drain out of her, replaced by something more complicated. Anything else? That you put yourself through hell rather than ask for help, even when you needed it. I don't like being in debt to people. It's not debt if it's freely given. Lila looked at him standing there in the garden, this dangerous man who wrote beautiful letters and investigated her background and somehow made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. I need to know I can trust you, she said finally. What would that look like? No more investigating. No more decisions about my life without asking me first. No matter how much you think you're protecting me. Matteo nodded. Deal. And I want to contribute while we're here. Rent, food, something. I won't be a charity case. Rosa could use help with the housework, and the garden needs tending. It was a compromise. They both knew he didn't need her money or her labor, but he was giving her a way to maintain her dignity, and that mattered. Okay, Lila said. We can try this? Good. Matteo's smile was small but genuine. Because I was hoping you'd stay. The diner felt different when Rosa dropped her off that morning. Smaller somehow, shabbier than she remembered. The coffee did taste like it had been sitting on a hot plate for 6 hours, and the customers seemed ruder than usual, but it was still her job, still her responsibility. You look different, Tony said as she tied her apron. Rested. Good night's sleep. Lila checked the coffee pot and started a fresh batch. Amazing what clean sheets can do. The morning passed quietly. Regular customers, familiar orders, the comfortable rhythm of work she'd been doing for years. But around lunchtime things changed. A man she didn't recognize sat down at the counter. Expensive suit, careful smile, the kind of teeth that cost money to keep that white. Coffee, please, he said when she approached. Lila poured him a cup, noting how he barely looked at it. His attention was on her, studying her face like he was memorizing it. You're Lila Brooks, he said, after she'd moved on to other customers. She turned back to him, every instinct telling her to be careful. Do I know you? Not yet. But I know you. His smile never wavered. I know you've been staying with a mutual friend. Matteo De Luca. Lila's blood went cold, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. He pulled out a business card and left it next to his untouched coffee. When you remember, give me a call. I think we could help each other. He stood up and left a 20 on the counter, far too much for a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk. As he reached the door, he turned back. Tell Matteo that Rocco says hello. Then he was gone, leaving nothing but the business card and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. Lila's hands shook as she cleared the counter. The business card was simple, elegant. Rocco Vescari, consultant, just a name and a phone number. She knew without asking that this was the threat Matteo had been protecting her from, the reason she was staying at his house, the reason for Nico's watchful presence. And now the threat had a face and a name, and knew exactly where to find her. She waited until her break to call the number Matteo had given her. Not Nico this time, Matteo himself. Rocco Vescari was just here, she said as soon as he answered. Silence on the other end. Then, are you hurt? No. But he knew where I worked. Knew I was staying with you. What did he say? Lila repeated the conversation word for word, including the business card and the message for Matteo. I'm sending someone to pick you up, Matteo said when she finished. I'm not done with my shift. Lila, I'm not running from my job because some man in an expensive suit tried to intimidate me. Her voice was stronger than she felt. But I wanted you to know. Another pause. You're sure you're okay? I'm sure. She wasn't. But saying it out loud helped make it true. Then finish your shift. But Nico will be watching from across the street. I won't be able to see him. That's the point. After she hung up, Lila felt oddly comforted. Someone was looking out for her. Someone who respected her choices, even when he disagreed with them. The rest of her shift passed without incident. No more strange men, no more veiled threats. Just the familiar routine of pouring coffee and taking orders and pretending her hands weren't shaking. When Rosa picked her up at closing time, Lila was grateful for the warm car and the kind silence on the drive home. Home. When had she started thinking of Matteo's house as home? How's Evelyn? Lila asked as they pulled into the driveway. Better. The stairs at your apartment were hard on her breathing. She's been sitting in the garden most of the day. Says it reminds her of the place she grew up. Inside, Lila found her grandmother exactly where Rosa had said, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea and a book in her lap. But she wasn't reading. She was just sitting, breathing the clean air and watching the light change as evening approached. This is nice, Evelyn said as Lila settled into the chair beside her. The garden, all of it, the quiet, the safety, not having to worry about you walking home alone in the dark. Lila felt a pang of guilt. She'd never realized how much her grandmother worried about her, how much stress her independence had cost them both. Matteo's a good man, Evelyn continued. Different than I expected. What did you expect? Someone harder, colder. Evelyn's smile was soft. He spent an hour this afternoon fixing the lock on my bedroom door. Said a lady should feel secure in her room. Very old-fashioned, very respectful. He fixed your lock with his own hands. Rosa says he's handy that way. Likes to take care of things himself when he can. The image of Matteo with a screwdriver, carefully adjusting a door lock so an elderly woman would feel safe, did something warm and complicated to Lila's chest. He's been good to us, she admitted. More than good. He's been kind. Evelyn reached over and took Lila's hand. Kindness from a powerful man is rare. Don't take it lightly. That night, after Evelyn had gone to bed and Rosa had headed home to her own family, Lila found herself alone with Matteo in the kitchen. He was reading at the table, a thick book that looked like it might be about history or philosophy. Light reading? She asked, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. He closed the book and set it aside. Helps me think clearly. About what? About the difference between what I can control and what I can't. His dark eyes met hers. About how to be a good man in a world that doesn't always reward goodness. Lila thought about that. About this man who lived in a dangerous world but read philosophy and fixed locks for grandmothers. Tell me about today, he said gently. So she did. About Rocco and the business card and the feeling of being watched and evaluated. About how it felt to be threatened but also protected at the same time. I'm sorry, Matteo said when she finished. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. It's not your fault, isn't it? If I hadn't written back to your letter, if I'd minded my own business, then I'd still be alone. The words came out before she could stop them. And I'd still be scared, just about different things. Matteo looked at her carefully. What were you scared of before? Everything. Evelyn's health, the rent, losing my job, growing old alone. Lila's voice was soft, honest. At least now I'm scared with someone who cares enough to help. I do care, he said quietly, more than I probably should. Why shouldn't you? Because caring makes you vulnerable, and vulnerable people in my world don't last long. Lila reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, calloused in places that suggested he did work with his hands, despite his expensive clothes. Maybe it's time to change worlds, she said. Matteo looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. It's not that simple. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the kitchen table, both of them thinking about possibilities and complications, and the space between what they wanted and what they could have. Finally, Matteo spoke. What are you thinking about? Sunday mornings, Lila said honestly. The kind I wrote about in my first letter. Yellow curtains and coffee that doesn't taste burnt? Something like that. She smiled. What about you? About how to keep you safe without losing you. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. About whether it's possible to have both. We'll figure it out, Lila said, and for the first time since this whole thing started she actually believed it. Outside, the night was quiet, except for the soft sound of wind in the trees. Inside, two people who had found each other by accident were learning that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. And somewhere across town, men in expensive suits were making plans that would test everything they were building together. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight there was just the kitchen table and joined hands, and the possibility that love could be stronger than fear. Tonight, that was enough. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. Lila worked her shifts at the diner, while Rosa or Nico drove her back and forth. Evelyn spent her mornings in the garden and her afternoons napping in the blue room where her breathing came easier, and Matteo moved through it all like a quiet guardian, present but never overwhelming. It was the small things that surprised Lila most. How he remembered that Evelyn liked her tea with honey and brought it to her without being asked. The way he'd found a radio that picked up the oldies station her grandmother loved. How he'd quietly rearranged his schedule so someone was always home when the doctor came for Evelyn's checkups. "He's courting us both," Evelyn said one afternoon as they sat in the garden together. "You with his letters and attention, me with his kindness to an old woman. Grandma, it's smart," Evelyn continued, her eyes twinkling. "Her man who wants to win a woman's heart had better be good to the people she loves." Lila blushed, but she couldn't argue. Matteo was good to Evelyn, patient with her slow movements, careful with her pride, never treating her like a burden. He'd even started joining them for afternoon tea, listening to her grandmother's stories about the old neighborhood with genuine interest. "You like him," Lila said. "I do, more than I expected to." Evelyn reached over and patted her hand. "But more important, he likes himself better when you're around. That's a good sign in a man." That evening, Lila was helping Rosa prepare dinner when Matteo came into the kitchen looking different. Younger somehow, less guarded. He'd changed out of his usual pressed shirts and expensive suits into jeans and a sweater that looked soft and worn. "Smells good in here," he said, stealing a piece of carrot from Rosa's cutting board. "Get out of my kitchen," Rosa scolded, but she was smiling. "Both of you, go sit down. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Instead of leaving, Matteo moved to the stove where a pot of sauce was simmering. "My grandmother's recipe?" he asked Rosa, "with a few improvements." Rosa nudged him with her elbow. She never did understand the importance of fresh herbs. "She'd be horrified to hear you say that. She'd be proud to see you happy again," Rosa said quietly. Something passed between them, some understanding that Lila wasn't part of. She felt like she was seeing a different side of Matteo, not the careful man who wrote letters or the dangerous one who commanded protection, but someone younger and more open, someone who had been part of a family before tragedy changed everything. "Tell me about her," Lila said impulsively. "Your grandmother." Matteo turned from the stove, surprise flickering across his face. "Nonna. She was formidable, barely 5 feet tall but could silence a room with one look. She ran this household like a general and cooked like an angel. She taught him everything he knows about taking care of people," Rosa added. "How to make someone feel welcome, how to show respect, how to protect without smothering." "Is that what you learned from her?" Lila asked. "How to protect without smothering." Matteo's smile was soft, distant. "She used to say that love without freedom isn't love at all. It's possession." His eyes found Lila's. "I've been trying to remember that." Dinner was different that night. Less formal, more like a family gathering. Evelyn told stories about Lila as a little girl, and Matteo shared memories of growing up in this house. Rosa fussed over everyone, making sure plates stayed full and wine glasses never emptied. After Evelyn had gone to bed, Lila found herself helping Matteo clean up, while Rosa headed home to her own family. They worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes and putting away leftovers like they'd done it together 100 times before. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said as she dried a wine glass. "Always. That room you showed me, the locked one, what's really in there?" Matteo's hands stilled in the soapy water. For a moment, Lila thought he wouldn't answer. "Hopes," he said finally. "Dreams that never got to come true. Tell me." He pulled his hands from the water and dried them slowly on a dish towel. "Sophia and I, we were trying for a baby for 2 years. When she finally got pregnant, we were so happy, so excited." His voice was quiet, careful. "We started planning immediately. Bought furniture, picked out colors, chose names." Lila set down the wineglass and turned to face him fully. "What happened? I had enemies. Business rivals who thought hurting my family would hurt me." Matteo's jaw tightened. "They were right. The car bomb. Sophia was 8 months pregnant. We'd just found out we were having a daughter, going to name her Isabella after my grandmother." His voice broke just slightly on the name. The bomb was meant for my car, but Sophia took it to her doctor's appointment. She wanted to surprise me with new ultrasound pictures. Lila felt tears burn behind her eyes. Matteo, I kept the nursery exactly the way we'd prepared it. Thought maybe someday I'd be ready to say goodbye properly. But I never was. Every time I tried to go in there, I just saw everything we'd lost. Without thinking, Lila reached for him. Her arms went around his waist, and after a moment of surprise, his came around her shoulders. They stood like that in the warm kitchen, holding each other while the weight of his grief settled between them. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I never thought I'd be able to care about anyone else," he said into her hair. "Never thought I'd want to risk that kind of loss again." Lila pulled back just enough to look at his face. "And now? Now I think maybe Sophia would want me to be happy. Maybe she'd want that room to hold new dreams instead of old sorrow." "What kind of new dreams?" Matteo's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "The kind that involve yellow curtains and Sunday mornings, and someone who makes tea exactly the way I like it. I don't know how you like your tea." "Yes, you do." His smile was soft. "You've been making it perfectly for 3 days." Lila realized he was right. Somehow, without asking, she'd started paying attention to how he took his coffee in the morning and his tea in the evening, how he liked his eggs cooked and which side of the newspaper he read first. All the small details that mattered when you cared about someone. "Matteo? Yeah? I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and true. Matteo's breath caught, and for a moment, Lila thought she'd said too much too soon. Then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. But when she kissed him back, when her hands fisted in his sweater and pulled him closer, something broke open between them. 3 weeks of letters and careful conversations and building trust all poured into this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matteo rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you too," he whispered. "And it scares me more than anything I've ever faced." "Why?" "Because I don't think I could survive losing you." Lila's heart clenched at the raw vulnerability in his voice. "You're not going to lose me." "You can't promise that." "No," she agreed, "but I can promise that I'm not going anywhere by choice. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm choosing to stay, even knowing what my world is like, the danger, the complications, especially knowing." Lila's hands came up to frame his face. "You're worth the risk." The next morning brought autumn's first real cold snap. Lila woke to frost on the windows and the sound of the furnace kicking on. She dressed quickly and checked on Evelyn, who was still sleeping peacefully under the thick quilt Rosa had provided. Downstairs, she found Matteo in the kitchen making coffee. He was already dressed for work, crisp shirt, perfectly knotted tie, the armor of his business world. But when he saw her, his expression softened. "Good morning," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee exactly the way she liked it. "Good morning." She accepted the cup and realized they were both being careful, polite, like they weren't sure how to act after last night's confessions. "About last night," they both said at the same time, then stopped and laughed. "You first," Matteo said. "I meant what I said, all of it." Lila met his eyes steadily. "Did you?" "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt. "But I want you to understand what you're signing up for. My world isn't just dangerous, it's complicated in ways that might not be obvious yet. Such as..." Matteo was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "There are expectations. Rules about how business is conducted, how families are protected, how respect is shown. Some of those rules might conflict with your independence. Give me an example. The wives and daughters of men in my position don't usually work outside the home. They're considered too valuable, too much of a target." Lila's spine straightened. "And you're telling me this because..." "Because I need you to know that being with me might mean giving up things that matter to you. And I need to know if that's something you can live with. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be safe, but I also want you to be happy, and I'm not sure those things are compatible." Lila set down her coffee cup and moved closer to him. "What if we made our own rules? What if we decided together what safety looks like and what happiness requires? That's not how this world works." "Then maybe it's time to change how this world works." She reached for his tie, straightening it even though it was already perfect, at least in this house, for this family. Matteo's hands came up to cover hers. "You want to be part of this family. I want to build a family with you, here, in this house, with room for Evelyn and respect for Rosa and whatever happiness we can create together. And the locked room?" Lila thought about it, about the grief he carried, and the dreams that had been destroyed. Maybe it's time to open it. Not to forget Sophia and Isabella, but to make room for what comes next. Matteo stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he took her hand and led her upstairs. The locked room was at the end of the hall, its door painted white like all the others, but somehow different, heavy with the weight of sorrow and memories. Matteo stopped in front of it, key in his hand. "I haven't been inside since the funeral," he said quietly. "You don't have to go in now, but maybe you could unlock it. Let some light in." The key turned easily like it had been waiting. The door swung open to reveal a room painted in soft yellow, filled with afternoon sunlight from tall windows. A crib stood in one corner, white and perfect and empty. A rocking chair sat nearby, and shelves lined the walls, ready for books and toys and all the things a baby would need. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and somehow hopeful all at once. "Yellow," Lila said softly. "Sophia's favorite color." Matteo's voice was rough with emotion. "She said it was the color of sunshine and new beginnings." Lila stepped into the room carefully, like she was entering a church. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood and something else. Love, maybe. The kind of love that planned and hoped and prepared for a future that never came. "She had good taste," Lila said, running her hand along the crib's railing. "She did." Matteo joined her in the center of the room. "She would have been a wonderful mother. Tell me about her." So he did. Standing in the yellow room that had been prepared for his daughter, Matteo told Lila about Sophia, how they'd met at a charity gala when they were both 25, how she'd made him laugh by insulting his tie, how she'd seen past his reputation to the man underneath and loved him anyway. He told her about Sophia's work with children's charities, her terrible cooking, her habit of reading 3 books at once, how she'd sing off-key in the shower and leave coffee rings on his expensive furniture and make him feel like the luckiest man alive. "She sounds wonderful," Lila said when he finished. She was. Matteo's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And she's gone. But for the first time in 3 years I can remember her with joy instead of just pain. Because of me? Because of you. Because you've reminded me that love doesn't end with loss. It just transforms." Lila moved to the window, looking out at the garden where Evelyn spent her mornings. From here she could see the whole backyard, the carefully tended flower beds, the small fountain, the bench where Matteo sometimes sat with his evening coffee. "What do you see when you look out this window?" she asked. Matteo came to stand beside her. "I used to see everything I'd lost. Now I think I see everything that's still possible." They stood together in the yellow room, sunlight warming their faces, both of them thinking about the future. Not the one that had been taken away, but the one they might build together. "Lila? Yeah? I love you." The words were simple, unadorned, true. Lila turned to face him, seeing not the dangerous man or the careful letter writer or the grief-stricken widower, but just Matteo, the man who'd fixed her grandmother's lock and remembered how she liked her coffee and was brave enough to open a door he'd kept closed for 3 years. "I love you too," she said. This time, when he kissed her, it was in a room full of sunlight and new possibilities. This time it felt like a promise. The afternoon brought unwelcome visitors. Lila was at the diner, working the lunch shift, when she noticed 2 men sitting at a corner table. They'd been there for over an hour, nursing the same cups of coffee and watching everything that happened in the restaurant. One of them kept taking pictures with his phone, of her, of the other customers, of the front door and the kitchen entrance. During her break, she called Nico. "2 men corner table, been here over an hour taking pictures," she said quietly from the staff bathroom. "Can you describe them?" Lila peeked out the bathroom door. One's big, probably 6 foot something, dark hair, scar on his left hand. The other's smaller, older, wearing an expensive watch. "Don't go near them. Don't let them corner you alone. I'm 5 minutes away." "What about my shift?" "Tell Tony you're sick. Leave through the back door." Lila's hands shook as she hung up the phone. This was really happening. The threat wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was sitting 20 feet away, drinking coffee and documenting her routine. She found Tony in the kitchen, elbow deep in prep work for the dinner rush. "I need to go home," she said. "I'm not feeling well." Tony looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, concern creasing his weathered face. "You do look pale. Go on, get some rest. I'll cover your tables." Lila grabbed her coat and purse from the staff area, hands still trembling. The back door led to an alley that connected to the street behind the diner. She'd used it hundreds of times for smoke breaks and trash runs, but today it felt like an escape route. Nico was waiting by a dark sedan, engine running. "Get in," he said, scanning the alley for threats. Are they following? Not yet. Nico pulled into traffic smoothly, checking his mirrors constantly. But they know your schedule now. Where you work, what time you leave, probably where you live before you move to Mateo's. What do they want? Information. Leverage. Ways to pressure Mateo through you. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. The good news is they're still in the watching phase. The bad news is that won't last forever. The ride home was quiet except for the sound of Nico's phone buzzing with text messages. He answered them with one-word responses, keeping his eyes on the road and the mirrors. At the house, Mateo was waiting in the front hall before they'd even reached the door. One look at Lila's face and he knew something had changed. "Tell me," he said simply. So she did. About the men and the pictures and the feeling of being studied like a problem to be solved. Mateo listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Pack a bag," he said when she finished. "You and Evelyn both. Where are we going?" "Somewhere safer. A house outside the city, better security, fewer variables to control. For how long? However long it takes." Lila felt something cold settle in her stomach. "And then what? We live in hiding forever. I give up my job, my independence, everything that makes my life mine. If that's what it takes to keep you alive, that's not living, Mateo. That's just surviving." He turned to face her fully, and she saw fear in his eyes. Raw, desperate fear that she recognized because she'd felt it herself when Evelyn had gotten sick. "I can't lose you," he said quietly. "I won't survive it this time. You won't lose me, but I won't disappear either." Lila moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "There has to be another way, such as, make them go away. Use whatever power you have, whatever influence, whatever it takes to make this stop." Mateo's jaw tightened. "That would require permanent solutions." "Then find permanent solutions." The words hung between them, heavy with implications. Lila was asking him to use his dangerous world to protect their gentle one, to cross lines he might not be able to uncross. "You don't know what you're asking," he said. "I'm asking you to fight for us, whatever that looks like. However, it has to happen." Mateo stared at her for a long moment. "And after? When it's done, can you live with whatever I have to do to make it happen?" Lila thought about it, really thought about it. About the man who'd written her beautiful letters, who fixed locks for elderly women, who kept a nursery as a shrine to love and loss. About the man who was also powerful enough to make threats disappear permanently. "Yes," she said finally, "as long as you can live with yourself afterward. I can live with anything if it means keeping you safe." That evening, while Evelyn napped and Rosa prepared dinner, Mateo made phone calls from his study. Quiet conversations in a mixture of English and Italian, his voice controlled but implacable. Lila could hear the tone even through the closed door, the sound of a man calling in debts and making arrangements that would change everything. She sat in the yellow room, now unlocked and filled with afternoon light. The rocking chair was comfortable, and the view of the garden was peaceful. She tried to imagine what Sophia would think of this situation. Would she approve of Lila asking Mateo to use his power this way? Would she understand that sometimes love required difficult choices? The baby books were still on the shelves, dust-covered but intact. What to expect when you're expecting? The first year. Lullabies from around the world. Dreams and plans and hopes that had never gotten to grow into reality. But maybe, Lila thought, that didn't mean they had to stay dreams forever. Maybe new dreams could grow in the same soil, different but equally beautiful. When Mateo found her there an hour later, she was still sitting in the rocking chair, thinking about yellow curtains and Sunday mornings, and the possibility of safety earned through strength. "It's done," he said quietly. "What's done?" "The threat. Rocco and his people. They won't be a problem anymore." Lila looked at him carefully, searching his face for signs of what it had cost him. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. We're fine, all of us." "And them?" Mateo was quiet for a moment. "They're no longer in a position to threaten anyone." It was all the answer she needed, all the answer she wanted. "Come here," she said, holding out her hand. He crossed the room and took her hand, letting her pull him down to sit on the arm of the rocking chair. The room was warm with late afternoon sunlight, peaceful in a way that felt permanent. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "New dreams," Lila said honestly. "The kind that grow in rooms full of sunshine." Mateo's arm came around her shoulders, holding her against his side. "What kind of new dreams?" "The kind that involve yellow curtains and babies who get to grow up safe and loved and free." She felt him go still against her. "Babies? Someday, maybe." if that's something you'd want. With you, with me. Matteo was quiet for so long that Lila began to worry she'd pushed too far too fast. But when she looked up at his face, she saw wonder there and hope. I'd want that, he said softly, more than anything. Even knowing it would mean starting over, letting go of the past and building something completely new. Especially knowing that. He turned to look around the yellow room, seeing it with new eyes. Sophia would have loved you, you know. She would have wanted this room to be full of laughter again. How can you be sure? Because she loved me. And she would have wanted me to be happy. Matteo's voice was steady, certain. This room was always meant for new life. Maybe it's time to let it fulfill that purpose. Lila leaned against him, feeling safe and loved and hopeful for the first time in longer than she could remember. Outside, evening was painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside, a man and woman sat in a room full of sunlight and possibility, planning a future that honored the past while embracing what was to come. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices to make about how to blend their worlds and build a life together. But tonight, there was just this: the warmth of his arm around her, the promise of dreams coming true, and the knowledge that love really could conquer fear. Tonight that was more than enough. It was everything. The morning after Matteo's phone calls, the house felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from the very air. Layla woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and the sound of laughter drifting up from the kitchen. Evelyn was sitting at the table with Rosa and Matteo, all three of them sharing what looked like a private joke. Her grandmother's color was better than it had been in months, and her breathing seemed easier. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Evelyn said as Lila entered the kitchen. "Rosa's been telling us about her grandson's first attempts at cooking. Apparently he tried to make pasta sauce with ketchup. It could have been worse," Rosa protested, but she was smiling. At least he didn't burn the kitchen down like his father did when he was learning. Matteo poured Lila a cup of coffee, adding cream exactly the way she liked it. When their fingers brushed as he handed her the cup, he squeezed gently. "Sleep well?" he asked quietly. "Better than I have in weeks." It was true. For the first time since the threats started, she'd slept through the night without jumping at every sound. "Good." His smile was soft, private. "We need to talk later. About the future." "What kind of future?" "The kind that involves yellow curtains." After breakfast, Evelyn settled in the garden with her book while Rosa went to the market. Matteo led Lila to his study, a room she'd only glimpsed before. It was lined with books and dominated by a large desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the window. Instead of taking his place behind the desk, Matteo pulled another chair close to hers so they were facing each other, knees almost touching. "The threat is over," he said without preamble. "Rocco and his men have been convinced to pursue other interests far from here." "Convinced how? Does it matter?" Lila considered this. A week ago she would have demanded details. Now she found she trusted Matteo to handle his world in whatever way kept them safe. "No," she said. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's done." "It's done." Matteo reached for her hands, lacing their fingers together. "Which means we can make real plans now, about what comes next." "I'd like that. I've been thinking about what you said. About making our own rules, building our own version of what this life looks like. And I think you're right. I think it's time to change how things work, at least in this house." Matteo's thumb traced across her knuckles. "I want you to keep working at the diner if that makes you happy. I want Evelyn to have her garden and her independence. I want this to be a real home, not a fortress." Lila felt her heart expand. "That's what you want?" "That's what I want. A life where protection doesn't mean imprisonment, where love means freedom, not fear. What about your business, your responsibilities?" "I'm making changes there too, stepping back from the more dangerous aspects, focusing on the legitimate enterprises." Matteo's expression grew serious. "It won't happen overnight, but I want to build something I can be proud of, something our children could be proud of." "Our children? If that's something you want. Someday." Lila's breath caught. They'd talked about this in the yellow room, but hearing him say it again, in the clear light of morning, made it feel real. "I want that," she said. "I want everything with you. Even if it means being part of a world that's complicated, that comes with responsibilities and expectations. As long as we face those complications together, as long as I have a voice in the decisions that affect our life." "You'll have more than a voice," Matteo promised. "You'll have equal say in everything that matters. This is a partnership, Lila, in every sense of the word. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands linked, both of them absorbing the magnitude of what they were promising each other. So what's the next step? Lila asked. Well, Matteo's smile turned slightly mischievous. Traditionally, this would be the point where I ask your father for permission to marry you. Since that's not possible, you could ask my grandmother. I could. Should I be nervous? Lila laughed, terrified. She's been evaluating you since the day we arrived. And? How do you think I'm doing? You fixed her door lock and remembered her tea preference. You're probably safe. That afternoon, Lila watched from the kitchen window as Matteo sat with Evelyn in the garden. They talked for nearly an hour, her grandmother's face growing more animated as the conversation progressed. At one point, Evelyn reached over and patted his hand, nodding emphatically. When they came inside, both of them were smiling. Well, Lila asked. He has my blessing, Evelyn said firmly, and my expectation that he'll treat you like the treasure you are. I will, Matteo said solemnly, every day for the rest of my life. That evening he proposed properly, not with fanfare or elaborate planning, but simply and perfectly. They were in the yellow room, discussing how to rearrange the furniture to make it more welcoming, when he suddenly dropped to one knee. Lila Brooks, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Will you marry me? Will you help me fill this house with laughter and this room with new dreams? The ring was beautiful, a simple solitaire that caught the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. But what took her breath away was the look on his face. Pure love, pure hope, pure certainty that this was right. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The ring fit perfectly, like it had been made for her finger. Later she would learn that Matteo had guessed her size from watching how her other rings fit, had spent hours choosing something simple and elegant and timeless. But in that moment, all that mattered was the way he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the yellow room while sunlight painted everything golden. The wedding was small and perfect. Just family and close friends gathered in the garden behind the house on a crisp December morning. Evelyn cried happy tears as she walked Lila down the makeshift aisle. Rosa fussed over everyone and made sure the flowers were perfect. Naco stood as Matteo's best man, looking uncomfortable in his formal suit, but smiling nonetheless. Father Giuseppe, who had baptized Matteo as a baby, performed the ceremony. His words about love and commitment and building a life together felt more meaningful in this setting, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness rather than a crowd of business associates. Lila wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit, but still carrying the scent of lavender and old lace. Matteo wore a dark suit and a tie that Evelyn had helped him choose, declaring that the groom needed something with personality. When he saw her walking toward him, his composure cracked just enough for her to see the emotion underneath. By the time she reached him, there were tears in his eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she took his hand. "You're not so bad yourself." The vows they'd written themselves were simple, honest, full of promises about partnership and protection and choosing each other every day. When Father Giuseppe pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed was soft and sweet and felt like coming home. The reception was held in the same garden, with lights strung between the trees and Rosa's cooking-filling tables that groaned under the weight of food made with love. Tony had closed the diner to attend, bringing a cake he'd made himself and declaring that any man who made Lila this happy was all right by him. As evening fell and the guests began to drift away, Lila found herself standing with Matteo by the fountain, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Impossibly happy," she replied. "You? I keep waiting to wake up and discover this is all a dream. It's real." Lila turned in his arms to face him. "We're real. This life we're building is real. I love you, Mrs. De Luca." The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. De Luca, Lila De Luca. She was part of something now, part of a family, and a legacy, and a love story that would outlast them both. "I love you too, Mr. De Luca." 3 months later, Lila was pregnant. She found out on a Tuesday morning in March, staring at a pregnancy test in the bathroom while Matteo was downstairs making coffee. The 2 pink lines appeared slowly, like a message from the universe that their dreams were becoming reality. When she came downstairs, Matteo took one look at her face and set down his coffee cup. "What?" he asked, immediately concerned. Instead of answering, Lila pulled the test from behind her back and held it out to him. For a moment he just stared. Then understanding dawned, and his face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, wonder, before settling on something that looked like pure happiness. "Really?" he whispered. "Really?" He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around just like he had when he'd proposed. When he set her down, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We're having a baby," he said, like he was trying to make it real. "We're having a baby," they told Evelyn over breakfast, watched her face light up with the kind of joy that only grandmothers-to-be could feel. Rosa cried and immediately started planning meals for someone who was eating for 2 now. Even Nico smiled when he heard the news, gruffly offering to teach the baby about security when it was old enough. That evening, they sat in the yellow room, planning and dreaming, and marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. The room that had once held grief and broken dreams was now filled with hope and new possibilities. "What if something happens?" Matteo asked quietly, as they looked at paint swatches and furniture catalogues. "What if something wonderful happens instead?" Lila countered. "What if this baby grows up safe and happy and surrounded by love? What if I'm not a good father? You will be." She moved to sit on the arm of his chair, running her fingers through his hair. "You'll be protective without being controlling, strong without being frightening, gentle when it matters most. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen how you love, how you take care of the people who matter to you, how you've changed your whole life to make room for happiness." Matteo leaned into her touch, some of the worry leaving his expression. "I want to be the kind of father our child can be proud of. You already are." The pregnancy was easier than either of them had expected. Lila worked at the diner until she was 7 months along, despite Matteo's worried protests and Tony's increasingly creative attempts to make her take it easy. She finally agreed to step back when bending over tables became more of an adventure than she was comfortable with. The birth was fast and intense, arriving 2 weeks early on a sunny September morning. Matteo nearly fainted when the contractions started, but pulled himself together in time to drive to the hospital at a speed that was probably illegal, but definitely necessary. Isabella Rose De Luca arrived at 11:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with dark hair and her father's serious expression. When the nurse placed her in Matteo's arms for the first time, he stared down at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She's ours," Lila said softly. Isabella Bella was indeed perfect. She had Lila's stubborn streak and Matteo's ability to observe everything around her with calm intensity. She slept through the night by 2 months old, smiled early, and seemed to find the whole world endlessly fascinating. Evelyn doted on her great-granddaughter with the devoted attention of someone who had never expected to see 4 generations of her family together. Rosa appointed herself unofficial grandmother and could frequently be found singing Italian lullabies, while Bella napped in her arms. The yellow room had been transformed completely. The crib was the same one that had waited empty for 3 years, but now it held a sleeping baby who filled the house with soft sounds and gentle chaos. The rocking chair where Lila had once sat planning their future now held midnight feedings and whispered conversations about everything and nothing. "Do you think Sophia would approve?" Lila asked one night as they stood watching Bella sleep. "I think she'd be thrilled," Matteo said without hesitation. "She always wanted this house to be full of children and laughter, and now it is. Now it is." By the time Bella was 6 months old, their life had settled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Matteo had successfully transitioned most of his business interests to legitimate enterprises, though he still maintained enough connections to ensure their family's continued safety. Lila had decided not to return to the diner, at least not full-time, choosing instead to focus on their daughter and the family they were building. Evelyn's health had stabilized with the better living conditions and reduced stress. She spent her mornings in the garden with Bella, teaching her great-granddaughter about flowers and birds and the simple pleasures of sunshine on your face. Rosa had officially become part of the family, her own children and grandchildren frequent visitors, who filled the house with noise and joy and the comfortable chaos of people who belong together. "I have something for you," Matteo said one evening as they sat in their bedroom, Bella finally asleep in her crib after a particularly energetic day. He handed Lila an envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. Her own handwriting, she realized. The letter that had started everything now carefully preserved and returned to her. "I thought you might want this back," he said, "for Bella when she's older, so she can know how we found each other." Lila opened the envelope carefully, reading words she'd written over a year ago in a moment of loneliness and hope. The letter that had gone to the wrong address and found exactly the right person. "Do you think she'll believe it?" she asked. "That her parents fell in love through letters? I think she'll believe that love finds a way even when everything seems impossible." Matteo's arm came around her shoulders. "I think she'll believe that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places." "And what will you tell her about your world? About the choices you had to make?" "I'll tell her the truth, that I was lost until I found you, and you helped me find my way back to the kind of man I wanted to be." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'll tell her that love doesn't erase the past, but it can transform the future." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Bella's soft breathing through the baby monitor. Outside, the city went about its business, unaware that in this house, a love story was continuing to unfold, one quiet moment at a time. "Matteo? Yeah? Do you remember what you wrote in your first letter? About my words deserving safety?" "I remember. I think what you really meant was that love deserves safety. That fragile, hopeful, terrifying thing between two people, it needs protection to grow." And now, Lila looked around their bedroom, thinking about the sleeping baby down the hall, the grandmother reading in the garden room, the housekeeper who had become family, the man beside her who had changed his whole world to make room for love. "Now I think we've built something worth protecting, something that will last. Forever? At least that long." 2 years later, the house on Maple Street had never been so full of life. Bella, now 2.5, toddled through the rooms like she owned them, chattering in a mixture of English and the Italian words Rosa had taught her. Her dark curls bounced as she moved, and her father's serious expression appeared only when she was concentrating on something particularly important, like stacking blocks or helping in the garden. Lila was pregnant again. 6 months along with a son they planned to name Gabriel. This pregnancy felt different from the first, more confident somehow. They knew what they were doing now, knew how to balance their various responsibilities with the needs of their growing family. Matteo had been elected to the local school board, using his business experience to help improve education in their district. It was a far cry from his old life, but he discovered a talent for building consensus and getting things done that served him well in the political arena. Evelyn, now 81, moved more slowly, but remained sharp and engaged. She had become the unofficial neighborhood grandmother, and children from several families made regular pilgrimages to her garden to hear stories and receive the kind of attention that only comes from someone who has lived long enough to know what really matters. Rosa had expanded her role to include teaching cooking classes in the church basement, passing on generations of family recipes to younger women who were eager to learn. She still fussed over the De Luca family like they were her own children, but now she had an entire community to mother. The yellow room had been repainted blue for Gabriel, but it retained the same sense of love and anticipation that had always filled it. The afternoon light still streamed through tall windows, and the rocking chair still held late-night feedings and whispered lullabies. But it was the kitchen that had truly become the heart of the house. Every morning, the family gathered around the table that had once seated two strangers, learning to trust each other. Now it held high chairs and sippy cups, newspapers shared between tired parents, and the comfortable chaos of people who belonged together. "More coffee?" Matteo asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." Lila shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position for her growing belly. "Did you remember you have that meeting with the principal today? Already rescheduled. Bella has her doctor's appointment, remember?" "Right. And Grandma has book club this afternoon. I'll drive her. Rosa's making that pasta salad she likes for the potluck." It was the kind of conversation that happened in households everywhere, the mundane logistics of people who cared about each other's schedules and happiness. But for Matteo and Lila, it still felt like a small miracle. Later that evening, after Bella had been bathed and read to and tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed elephant, Lila found Matteo in his study. He was reading at his desk, the same Marcus Aurelius book he'd been carrying since they met. "Still learning about what you can and can't control?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Still learning that the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming?" He closed the book and reached for her hand. "Like letters sent to the wrong address. Like strangers who write back with kindness. Like love that grows in the spaces between words." Lila squeezed his fingers, feeling the solid warmth of his wedding ring against her palm. In 2 weeks it would be their second anniversary. Sometimes it felt like they'd been together forever. Other times it seemed impossible that so much happiness could be built in such a short time. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Your old life? The power? The excitement?" Never. Matteo's answer was immediate and certain. That life was about control and fear, and never being sure who you could trust. This life is about partnership and growth, and knowing that whatever happens, we'll face it together. Even when Gabriel arrives and we're outnumbered by our children. Especially then. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked across the desk that had once represented the formal distance of his old world. Now it was just furniture, in a house full of love and laughter, and the sweet chaos of family life. Outside, autumn was painting the trees in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, a fire crackled in the fireplace, and soft music played from the radio in the kitchen. Upstairs, Bella slept peacefully in her toddler bed, and down the hall, Evelyn read in her favorite chair by the window. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life, the kind of evening Lila had dreamed about in that first letter, when she'd written about Sunday mornings and yellow curtains and the possibility of being truly happy. She'd found all of that and more, found it in the most unexpected way, with the most unlikely person, in a love story that had started with a mistake and become the most beautiful thing either of them had ever known. Matteo? Yeah, I'm glad I wrote the wrong address. His smile was soft and full of the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. So am I, love. So am I. And in the distance, the church bells chimed the hour, marking another moment in a life full of moments, another heartbeat in a love story that would continue for all the years to come. Outside, the world went about its business. Inside, a family that had been built on hope and sustained by choice continued to write their own happy ending, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time.